From 1929 to 1936, an unconstitutional mass deportation movement called Mexican repatriation took place. Starting during the Great Depression, approximately 1 to 2 million Mexicans and Mexican Americans were forcibly deported or coerced to leave the United States, because white Americans said that they were taking too many of the jobs from the real American citizens. 60% of those Mexicans that were deported from the United States were U.S. citizens, many of whom were escaping violence during the Mexican Revolution or were asked to come over here to work temporarily. But when the U.S. economy crashed in 1929 and the Great Depression started, Mexicans were blamed for taking jobs away from Americans. People like Congressman Martin Dies and President Herbert Hoover even joined in on the racism, saying that we needed to deport the Mexicans because American jobs are for real Americans. This essentially was a code for get rid of the Mexicans. The Los Angeles Welfare Department started deporting hospital patients of Mexican descent. It wasn't just the US government, it was local governments as well. According to History.com, the raids tore apart families and communities, leaving lasting trauma for Mexican Americans who remained in the United States. And when they did these raids, they did not care if you were legal or not. They didn't ask questions or for papers. If you looked Mexican, spoke Spanish, or had a Mexican-sounding name, you were arrested, put on trucks, buses, trains, and deported to Mexico. Secretary of Labor William Doak ran a campaign to remove 500,000 foreigners from the United States. LA raided prominently Hispanic places. In one 1931 raid in LA, they rounded up more than 400 people at La Placita Park and deported them back. And even though this was illegal, the Los Angeles City Council said in a memo, quote, "This isn't about constitutional validity, it's about the color of their skin." It was on that basis that local and federal officials were using to quite literally illegally deport citizens of this country. We do not care if you're born here, are naturalized citizens, or are even legal residents. We are going to deport you because we do not like the color of your skin. According to reporting from The Atlantic, in his address to a joint session of Congress last week, the president painted a dark portrait of American immigrants' population. Quote, "As we speak tonight, we are removing gang members, drug dealers, and criminals that threaten our communities and prey on our very innocent citizens." Just to note for the historical record here, most of them did not actually have any gang, drug, or criminal affiliation in any way. It was just the same old racist, xenophobic blame on the immigrants rhetoric. And it wasn't the first time that the US government had did this. If you just fast forward just a little bit to the 1950s and what is called Operation Wetback, under the direction of President Dwight D. Eisenhower, millions of Hispanics were deported in this country. Many of them were legal and still sent back. In the 1940s, President Franklin D. Roosevelt set up internment camps for Japanese residents, legal and non-citizens. The U.S. government during World War II, of course, because Japan was our enemy, rounded up approximately 120,000 Japanese people and put them in these internment camps. It was all based off of prejudice, but in the name of keeping America safe. When FDR did that, it was the second time that something called the 1798 Alien and Enemies Act was invoked by a president. This is the description of what that act is. Quote, "The Alien and Enemies Act of 1798 is a wartime authority that allows the president to detain or deport the natives and citizens of an enemy nation. The law permits the president to target these immigrants without a hearing and based only on their country of birth or citizenship. Although the law was enacted to prevent foreign espionage and sabotage in wartime, it can be and has been wielded against immigrants who have done nothing wrong, who have evinced no sign of disloyalty and are lawfully present in the United States. It is an overbroad authority that may violate constitutional rights in wartime and is subject to abuse in peacetime." So that is the 1798 Alien and Sedition Act. So that's essentially the beginning context here. I'm now going to play you a clip of Donald Trump speaking last year during the 2024 election cycle. He's addressing a crowd in Colorado, and listen closely to what he says here.
Upon taking office, we will have an Operation Aurora at the federal level. To expedite the removals of these savage gangs And I will invoke the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. Think of that. 1798. This was put there. 1798. That's a long time ago, right? To target and dismantle every migrant criminal network operating on American soil.
He's talking about Operation Aurora in Colorado, where many migrants were suspected of being in a Venezuelan gang, and so they went looking for the alleged gang members. More than 300 empty apartments were searched. No one was there. The operation actually arrested less than 10 people, seen widely as unsuccessful. But Trump credits that local operation and the 1798 Alien and Enemies Act as his big plan to do mass deportation nationwide. But it's not just that. It's November of 2023. The New York Times publishes a major article on Trump's immigration plans, and they wasted no time in the headline. As you can see, it reads here, sweeping raids, giant camps, and mass deportations inside Trump's 2025 immigration plans. The article goes on to talk about how, according to Trump's plans, both legal and illegal immigration would be heavily curtailed. In what is possibly one of the most horrific paragraphs in the article that we're going to actually come back to later on in the report, quote, Mr. Trump wants to build huge camps to detain people while their cases are processed and they await deportation flights. So they don't just want to deport the immigrants, but also hold them in camps. That was reported from the New York Times in 2023. Shortly after, this was released. Of course, it's Project 2025, which is strongly in favor of mass deportation. When Trump got reelected as president and then took office on January 20th, 2025, he immediately got to work on his xenophobic campaign. On his first day alone, he signed multiple executive orders targeting the community. Number 1, an executive order to end birthright citizenship. Number 2, a declaration of a national emergency at their southern border, which would allow for military forces to deploy to the U.S.-Mexico border, reinstating the Remain in Mexico policy and expands expedited removal procedures. Number 3, suspension of the U.S. refugee admissions program, including suspending the Central American Minors Program, affecting thousands of refugees awaiting resettlement. And number 4, the expansion of expedited removal. Within minutes of being sworn in, while he was still speaking at the inauguration, the new Trump administration shut down the CBP One app, launched during the first Trump administration and heavily used under Biden's term, where migrants seeking asylum in the United States could schedule appointments at our ports of entry along the southern border. And despite its challenges, the CBP One app facilitated the legal entry of over 800,000 people into the United States. But as soon as Trump got in there, boom, like a switch, they turned it off. After that, Trump told ICE to get ready to start deportations. And when they did, make sure you arrest them in their churches, schools, and hospitals too, because nothing is off limits. From there, it really was full speed, don't stop. Here's a compilation of news clips and statements we've put together.
Immigrant groups tonight are bracing for a real crackdown promised by the new Trump administration.
From coast to coast, ICE agents going city to city, sometimes door to door, tracking down the nearly 1.5 million undocumented set for deportation.
Thousands of troops have been deployed to the border with Mexico. On the other side, shelters are being set up for those forced out.
Yes. But you can see the numbers steadily increase, the number of arrests nationwide as we open up the aperture.
The estimates of perhaps those who have been convicted or arrested in the past, 700,000 to over 1 million. So after you do that, then you go after everybody who is there illegally.
If you're in the country illegally, you're on the table.
The acting Homeland Security Secretary said in a statement, criminals will no longer be able to hide in America's schools and churches to avoid arrest. What criminals are hiding in schools?
How many MS-13 members are the age of 14 to 17? Many of them.
Deportation raids have begun in Texas. In North Texas, recently, 84 people have been arrested as Navajo Nation leaders essentially are raising concerns amid alarming reports that indigenous people are being questioned and detained during these massive immigration sweeps. We have some major breaking news. According to the reporting by the Washington Post, the Trump administration is seeking to give immigration officers access to restricted information regarding migrant children and teens in the United States. On January 29, 2025, Donald Trump signed an executive order titled Expanding Migrant Operations Center at Naval Station Guantanamo Bay to Full Capacity. That's right, they planned on deporting migrants to Guantanamo Bay, notorious for torture during the Bush administration, and many presidents have tried to close it since. ProPublica and the Texas Tribune reported in early February how that effort was going. The headline reads, U.S. claims immigrants held at Guantanamo are worst of the worst. Their families say they're being unfairly targeted. Quote, the military planes departed from Texas in quick succession, 8 flights in as many days. Each one carried more than a dozen immigrants that the U.S. alleged are the worst of the worst, kinds of criminals including members of a violent Venezuelan street gang. Since February 4th, the Trump administration has flown about 100 immigrant detainees to the U.S. naval base in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, a facility better known for having held those suspected of plotting the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Officials have widely touted the flights as a demonstration of President Donald Trump's commitment to one of the central promises of his campaign, and they distributed photos of some of the immigrants as both takeoff and landing. But they have not released the names of those they're holding or provided details about their alleged crimes. In recent days, however, information about the flights and the people on them have emerged that calls the government's narrative into question. ProPublica and the Texas Tribune have identified nearly a dozen Venezuelan immigrants who have been transferred to Guantanamo. The New York Times published a larger list with some, but not all of the names. For 3 of the Guantanamo detainees who have been held at an immigration detention center in El Paso, Texas, ProPublica and the Tribune obtained records about their criminal histories and spoke to their families. The 3 men are all Venezuelan. Each had been detained by immigration authorities soon after crossing the U.S.-Mexico border and was being held in custody awaiting deportation. In some cases, they had been languishing for months because Venezuela, until recently, was not largely accepting deportees. According to the U.S. federal court records, 2 of them had no crimes on their records except for illegal entry. The third had picked up an additional charge while in detention for kicking an officer while being restrained during a riot. Relatives of the 3 men said in interviews on Tuesday that they have been left entirely in the dark about their loved ones. They said all their relatives were not criminals, and 2 provided records from the Venezuelan Interior Ministry and other documents to support their statements. They said the United States government has given them neither information about the detainees' whereabouts nor the ability to speak with them. Attorneys say they have also been denied access. The ACLU filed a lawsuit on Wednesday arguing that the U.S. Constitution gives the detainees rights to legal representation that shouldn't be stripped away just because they have been moved to Guantanamo. Trump directed the Departments of Defense and Homeland Security last month to prepare 30,000 beds at Guantanamo and later said the site was for criminal illegal aliens threatening the American people. Relatives of 3 of those currently detained in Guantanamo said the immigrants all had tattoos, and one of them, Simancas, was from Uragua, the state where Trinidad Uragua was born. The detainees' relatives dispute that their loved ones had anything to do with the group. Quote, "This doesn't make sense. He's a family man," Palma said in Spanish of her brother. Having tattoos is not a sin. This story is just one in many where, unfortunately, many are rounded up, snatched off the streets, and just sent anywhere. In early February, The Guardian reported that the Trump administration had deported 119 immigrants of varying nationalities to Panama, people from Afghanistan, Iran, China, and other countries. It's also part of a larger story, which is the process of how these deportations are happening, where immigrants are being held, and how they're targeting just anyone discriminately, including without asking for papers or without showing proof that they're federal agents. This here is a video of federal agents smashing the window of a Guatemalan immigrant with no Massachusetts criminal record. According to the Boston Globe, he was arrested Monday in New Bedford after federal agents shattered the glass on his vehicle as he and his wife waited inside the car for their lawyer to arrive. Juan Francisco Mendez, 29 years old, who was taken to an undisclosed location, has been in the United States for 2 years and was undocumented but pursuing an adjustment to his immigration status, according to his attorney. The tense standoff took about 30 minutes. The couple were taken from their car after an agent smashed in the rear right window. This is what it's like all across the country.
I think the bigger problem is the enemy from within, not even the people that have come in and destroying our country. By the way, totally destroying our country. The towns, the villages, they're being inundated. But I don't think they're the problem in terms of election day. I think the bigger problem are the people from within. We have some very bad people. We have some sick people, radical left lunatics.
When Donald Trump said that on the campaign trail, the enemy within, Vice President Kamala Harris, his contender in the election, accurately and immediately took notice that what Donald Trump was referring to was Americans. Americans that did not support him, agree with him, or exercised their freedom of speech right in voicing opposition to the Trump administration or voicing opposition to U.S. foreign policy. And one of the main targets of Trump's team was going to be the pro-Palestinian protesters, basically mounting down on them for exercising their free speech right, but because they were in support of Palestine, they were wrong. Therefore, now that he's back in office, they should be targeted. On March 8, 2025, at around 8:30 p.m., multiple federal agents from ICE arrived at the lobby of an apartment building in Columbia University's housing. Soon enough, they made their way to the apartment of Mohammed Khalil and barged in. They snatched him and threatened to arrest his 8-month-old pregnant wife. He was then taken to an undisclosed location where his wife could not reach him. Why? Because he exercised his First Amendment right and helped organize protests against Israel, supporting Palestine's right to self-determination. In their campaign to end anti-Semitism, which is ironic given they're literally neo-Nazis supporting them, the Trump administration is looking to deport anyone who participated, supported, or funded the pro-Palestinian movement. Mohammed Khalil was the first target. After his arrest, Trump said in a menacing statement, that he would be the first of many. A federal judge ruled last week that he can now be deported. According to reporting from ABC News, Mr. Khalil's lawyers said that the Department of Homeland Security relied on tabloids as evidence that he lied on his green card application. Just so we're all clear here, the tabloids in question were various conservative outlets. We're going to be covering his story and others in an upcoming TJPS special report regarding mass deportation targeting legal residents and the expulsion of legal residents for just speaking out against the Trump administration and things that the administration does not agree with. For instance, this memo, according to reporting from the Associated Press, was obtained by the U.S. State Department. Basically, you see here it is from Secretary of State Marco Rubio saying that effectively, the United States government has the authority to to expel people from this country based off of past, current, or future beliefs, statements, or ideologies. And that's going to be covered in our new upcoming special report, basically a part 2 of this, which will also cover many things, including substantive reporting on Guantanamo Bay as there are updates. But I'm going to show you this before we switch on to the next thing. This here is footage of Rumeysa Ozturk. Of course, she is a young college woman. She's a student in Massachusetts. And basically what you see here is federal agents approaching her, and then she is effectively kidnapped, vanished off the streets. This is a Ring camera footage that captures her here, and she's literally kidnapped off the streets. She is now sitting in a Louisiana detention center, according to reporting from ProPublica. A federal judge has just ordered essentially that she be moved to Vermont for a hearing. Of course, in her case, just like Mohammed Khalil, it is a Palestinian activist who is being targeted for exercising their First Amendment right. We're going to be covering that story in a new upcoming special report regarding this, because things are getting quite crazy.
I'll show you everything. Okay, cool. Yep. You're fine.
I understand you scary. Where the police? Where the police?
Where the police?
Yeah, you don't look like it. Why are you hiding your faces? Why are you hiding your faces?
Yep. Can I take everything? Yeah, I'm back with the doctor. Got it with you?
Yeah, we're gonna take one.
Is this here? How do I know this is the police? It's like, hey, you're the police like me. Is that anything going on here?
I will just note for the record here that that footage is just diametrically chilling. I mean, that could be anyone here. That could be me, that could be you, that could be a family member of mine, that could be a journalist, that could be anyone that does not agree with this administration, anyone that this administration views as an enemy of their agenda. That is the reality of life in the United States. Anyone can be snatched off the streets by unidentifiable masked federal agents and just taken into a car and sent to a facility, a literal detention facility in a whole nother state. That can be happen. But of course, it's going to be an undisclosed location where your family can't even find you because they're burying you so far into the system that no one can reach you or even know if you're alive. That's the terror that many families are going through. And they're not just going after immigrants. They're going after legal residents in this country as well. So, I digress. As I said, there's going to be a more deeper special report covering this and a whole lot of other issues that are happening in the country regarding the Trump administration's deportation plan. But there is another thing that you do need to know about. And of course, that is the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a Maryland father who was deported to El Salvador even after a federal judge told the Trump administration to halt the deportation. He was sent to this prison here, CCOT, one of the most notorious human rights abuses prisons in Latin America. We're going to have more full coverage on this in our upcoming special report, which will be a part 2 of this. But essentially, his family has been seeking answers for weeks and weeks. The Supreme Court even ruled in a unanimous 9-0 decision that the U.S. must facilitate the return of Garcia to the United States. But this entire week, we've watched the Trump administration openly defy the high court ruling and saying stuff like he'll never come back. The administration has repeatedly said that he is a part of MS-13 and that he is a part of that gang, all because, of course, the evidence pointing to the fact that he wore a Chicago Bulls hat and had tattoos. So, openly racist discrimination here. That's all the administration has. When Attorney General Pam Bondi was asked about his criminal affiliation, and if not, and if he does have criminal affiliation or is affiliated with MS-13, release the evidence. Attorney General Pam Bondi released what they call the evidence, and there literally is no support to her claim or the administration's claim that Abrego Garcia was a member of MS-13. Earlier this week, Donald Trump met with the El Salvadorian president where they joked in the Oval Office that neither of them could do anything about the situation, and Trump even asked him to start building more prisons like CCOT for homegrowns next. Because of course, if we go back to that clip where he's talking about the enemy from within, he's talking about you and I. Legal American citizens are next, for any reason, at any time, at random. With that kind of rhetoric and sabotage, Maryland Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen this week, in a desperate attempt to get answers for Kilmar's family, traveled to El Salvador. Initially, he was not able to meet with Kilmar Garcia, but after negotiations, he was. According to Senator Van Hollen, Garcia has been moved out of CCOT to a new prison, but still, he is not home. The Trump administration continues to mock Garcia by posting stuff like this on the White House's official Twitter account. A federal judge this week threatened to hold the administration in contempt for their lack of action to return Garcia home, and that same judge just yesterday said that he could recommend criminal prosecutions against the administration. Of course, what that would look like is that federal judge appointing a special prosecutor to pursue criminal contempt charges against administration officials, which could also result in imprisonment. Kilmar's case is just one of the many we're following here at the Jeremiah Patterson Show. Amid all that's going on with the secrecy of ISIS operations, ProPublica reported that 12 Democrats in Congress sent a letter to the Trump administration back in February to get answers on what's going on and what they're planning to do essentially with mass deportation. A more descriptive representation of what their plan is. How many legal residents have actually been detained or unlawfully, snatched off the streets? Those 12 Democrats have still gotten no response back from the White House after sending that back in February. I spoke to the reporter who wrote that article, Nicole Foy, an investigative journalist for ProPublica covering immigration and labor. Here's our interview. Major news story of the week, of course, is about Kilmar Garcia's illegal deportation. And the administration has made clear that, of course, even legal residents will be caught up in these deportation raids. You reported on how a local Philadelphia resident was harassed by immigration agents at a car wash. What have you been seeing in terms of observation, in terms of patterns among the cases where we're seeing citizens questioned and detained?
I think one of the things that's really important to make clear is that for quite a long time, federal immigration authorities have actually struggled with this issue of that they frequently detain, arrest, keep in a detention center for weeks or months at a time, and in some cases even unlawfully deport U.S. citizens. This is not something that began with the Trump administration, even his first term, but it's certainly something that a lot of experts warn is likely to increase in frequency, especially when there are policies in place like ones that the Trump administration is currently implementing and that we're seeing play out that involve things like, more use of expedited removal, really aggressive quotas for immigration agents. And so, the case that you're referring to was just one of several. There's been a pretty steady drumbeat of more across the country. Even just since the inauguration, I've one today that's a really interesting case of a young Florida man who's still in a county jail right now, despite reporting saying that his mother has brought his birth certificate and his social security number, but there's an ICE hold on him. That's happening right now as we're talking. So this is a pretty common issue and one that is certainly, I think, exacerbated when there are policies pushing for greater immigration enforcement actions.
And you write that this is not the first time in your article. Looking at the history of this happening back in the 30s and 40s and then under previous administrations, what's the difference between that historical record and what the Trump administration is doing now?
I don't know. As far as differences, I mean, there's certainly a lot of differences because of, different norms, different times, different places. But, you can see a lot in common, especially if you look at back at in the 30s and 40s. It was also a time of I think economic uncertainty.
Yeah.
And a time when it was really popular politically to blame immigrants for that economic uncertainty, whether it's jobs, lack of jobs, all that kind of thing. In this case, we're seeing a lot of, connections to crime that aren't really backed up by data.
Yeah.
But I think too, just through the some solid through lines is that these are always accompanied by claims of racial discrimination. A lot of folks, especially if you look back at the massive numbers of Mexican Americans who were deported. Some of them were Mexican American children who were born here to immigrant parents who were deported, and others were folks who had always lived here, but someone decided that because they were Mexican or looked Mexican or spoke Spanish, they were going to be deported. And I would say that's a pretty common claim. It doesn't, it's not always necessarily borne out in court, but we still see that today. Folks who say that they were targeted because they were speaking Spanish, because they were Hispanic, or because they didn't seem like someone's idea of maybe what an American should be. And that's certainly something too that we're seeing right now, and that many folks in Congress have raised when you see issues of Native Americans being pressed for their tribe, for their ID, and being told that their tribal ID is not sufficient. Puerto Ricans who are U.S. citizens, being asked about their citizenship status and getting caught up in some of these raids. That's something that people raise the question of, why are these people in particular being targeted when everything else, like the actual facts of the situation, should make it pretty clear that they are not under the jurisdiction of immigration officials.
Exactly. And I wanted to get your sort of your take with all of the reporting that you've done on the case regarding Kilmar Garcia, because this is a situation where even have many legal residents of this country who are concerned about unlawful deportations. What kind of precedent does that set? And what is the atmosphere right now among immigrants in this country, with just regard to ICE agents and other authorities?
Yeah, I would say that a lot of immigrants and immigrant families that I've spoken to, are really, quite obviously, like really afraid. Even if they're not necessarily, um, like undocumented, if they're here with legal status, we haven't seen that matter,
Yeah.
really, like it has in the past. Whether that just means that it's folks being detained at an airport, or visas being canceled, or folks with legal presence here suddenly losing it and being deported. So it's really hard to say, like, if you're, as long as you're not undocumented, as long as you didn't cross the border illegally, then you'll be fine, because that hasn't really been the case. But also too, like a huge number, I'm sorry, I don't have the exact numbers, but a huge number of um of immigrants live in mixed status families where
Yeah.
people have varying levels of citizenship status or legal status, undocumented. So people are pretty worried about their own family's safety, but also that's like one of the easiest ways as well, I think, for citizens to get caught up in this as well, whether they're trying to intervene in when their loved one is being detained, or they're just in the wrong place at the wrong time. But I think I'm glad you brought up the case of Kilmar Garcia, and I mean, sorry, that's not his full name. Um, I'm sorry, it's been a long
No, no,
day.
you're good. You're
But
good.
yeah, but I'm glad you brought up the case of the men who have been sent to El Salvador, because one of the points too that I think I've often made as I've been reporting about citizens being detained in this greater context is that that is one of the cases that advocates make for why the importance of due process, and beyond the fact that our Constitution guarantees due process for these things, but
Hmm.
also how we've seen a number of cases where even with due process afforded, it is sometimes still incredibly difficult for people to prove their citizenship. And so if more and more barriers are removed and you can be removed from the country faster and faster, how are you supposed to prove that you are a citizen, if
Exactly.
you see some of these things? So obviously, the greatest risk is for immigrants in this country, as we've seen, but also the claim that this shouldn't matter to you if you're a citizen, or if you came here legally, it shouldn't, don't be worried. That doesn't necessarily play out, because how are you supposed to prove that you are here legally, or how are you supposed to prove
Exactly.
that you're a citizen if you're not afforded a chance to appear before a judge and plead your case and present documents?
And we have been seeing that because, of course, due process is, now effectively not exactly happening, as people are just getting, arrested, and, legal citizens are being taken off the streets and being put into like detention facilities. The Supreme Court is going to be hearing the case regarding birthright citizenship in May. What would that mean if that were to be overturned, which in my mind is just like constitutionally insane?
Yeah, I mean, I think I talked with a number of advocates, especially folks at the ACLU who are involved in a lot of these cases and have also represented people who were detained despite being but by who were detained by immigration officials despite being citizens. And they mostly their argument and some of the arguments that they gave before the court to delay the implementation of it in advance before it could go into effect was simply because it would cause quite a bit of chaos for parents who, sometimes that is the easiest way to prove your citizenship, which is
Yeah.
having that birth certificate that shows where you were born here. And if at the same it happens, it can happen decently seamlessly for right
Hmm.
now, and I think one of the lawyers who I spoke to pointed out that you're putting a lot of extra pressure on some sleep deprived parents to
Yeah.
immediately be able to prove that their child was born here, and that can just cause a lot of unnecessary chaos that down the line could follow some of these kids, even if, they are citizens, but maybe like all the paperwork isn't done correctly at that time. But on top of that, too, we've seen that one of the biggest issues when it comes with citizens being detained, it's especially when it results in prolonged detention, almost deportation or even deportation in some cases. They It's usually because they have been flagged before in the system.
Mm.
And ICE in particular has been it's been recommended. There was a GAO report that analyzed how often this was happening, and that's really the most of the government data that we have on this. They pointed out that a huge issue is that they need to update their system when they, let's say you get arrested in 2020, and at that time you present your paperwork, and they say, oh, okay, we see that you're a citizen, and move on. But people who are detained once have a pretty high frequency of having to go through that
Yeah.
entire thing again. There's another man I wrote about who is his case is still being litigated. He's suing a Florida county for working with ICE officials and in his allegedly helping ICE officials with his detention. And it was because there had been a flag on his case, and even though he had resolved it previously, that flag was still in the system. The system hadn't been updated properly. And so the next official who, ran him through the system made the same exact mistake as previous folks did. And that's been a concern that not only advocates, but the US government itself, the GAO, a government agency, has flagged as an issue that ICE needs to address and is resulting in a lot of citizens being detained.
Is there any insight into the process in terms of after they're detained, like what it's like in these, detention centers or where exactly they're going and they're being held for so long?
Yeah, and like I would say too, I think the using the word detained, it's like the easiest one to use, but
Mhm.
everybody has a different definition of it. And I think ICE officials, CPP, like, or Border Patrol, like they would not consider what Jonathan, the young man in Philadelphia who I wrote about, went through. They would not consider that being detained. They would not consider that even being arrested. But of course, someone who is held at gunpoint and directed into
Yeah.
the room and handcuffed has a different understanding of that, and does feel like they have been arrested and detained even if they weren't actually booked. So it looks different. There's a case out of Chicago where a man, and this is in the in the courts right now too. A man was held for I believe 10 hours, and he was just picked up off the street while he was getting pizza. And
Wow.
and so that's how long it took for him to be able to show his citizenship. In the case of Peter Brown, the man whose case was in Florida, that's still being litigated, he was already in jail for a different crime. ICE put a hold on him, and he started being told that he was going to be transferred to immigration officials and possibly deported to Jamaica. And he was not from Jamaica. He said he had been there once on a cruise. And so that he was writing letters saying what is happening and trying to get access to legal help, trying to get the attention of an officer. Another man I wrote about who was picked up in the Washington state. He was begging for anyone to talk to him. He spent about a week in the Tacoma Detention Center in Washington state, begging if anybody ever. He had his passport on him, and yet he never was given an opportunity to present it. He ended up actually winning a settlement out of that because of what happened. And so, he was in Tacoma Detention Center with until he was finally able to flag down an ICE officer who did listen to him, check his documents. And so it varies. It's completely different, honestly, every time.
I feel like what's happening here is with all of these different cases, it's extremely overwhelming for the courts and also for immigration lawyers who are dealing with this. So I feel like my fear is that many of these cases, even regarding legal citizens, they're actually going to be deported without any due process at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to make predictions, but this GAO report that analyzed a time period that roughly encompassed the first Trump administration. It did have like a year of Obama. Of the last Obama administration, tacked in that data, but it estimated that they likely removed 70 likely citizens, and that's because they're looking at ICE data, and ICE had their the citizenship of this person that they had removed from the country as a U.S. citizen. It is entirely possible. It is one of the big fears, I think, for people, because also too with in immigration court, you're not guaranteed legal representation usually, unless it's a criminal, it's a felony crime like illegal reentry. You're afforded a lawyer because it's a felony and not so much like a civil administrative case. So you're not guaranteed an immigration lawyer. So yeah, not only are immigration lawyers overwhelmed, but there's a huge percentage of immigrants in immigration court with pending deportation cases who do not have legal representation. So that so they're still going. They may still have due process, but they don't have legal help and are representing themselves, which I think most of us would agree is pretty difficult.
Once again, that was my interview with Nicole Foy, an investigative journalist for ProPublica covering immigration and labor. Thank you all so much for watching this special report. Be sure to put your feedback in the comments down below. Of course, I said this is part 1 because there was a lot of other stuff I wanted to put in this report, but it would have been like 2 hours. So I'm going to do a part 2 later on coming up this coming week here on this show to talk about other things that have been happening regarding mass deportation under the Trump administration. I will say, just since I've been in production to produce this report the entire week, there have been multiple developments. For instance, on the Kilmar Garcia case, Senator Chris Van Hollen says that Kilmar Garcia tells him that he was traumatized by his time at that CCOT prison once again, in terms of what happened there. It is still, a matter of time in terms of negotiations and making sure that he is able to return home. We also have reporting just earlier today that the United States Supreme Court ruled basically blocking the Trump administration from deporting Venezuelans in Texas. The ACLU had warned that hundreds of Venezuelans were going to be deported immediately without due process. The Supreme Court has blocked those deportations under the 1798 Alien and Enemies Act, which the Trump administration, as we aforementioned in this report, is trying to use to deport hundreds of thousands, even millions of migrants in this country. Not just, of course, fathers, but also mothers and children as well, including, questioning people and children in school. So once again, we're going to continue following this here on the Jeremiah Patterson Show. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did enjoy this special report, be sure to share it with a family or friend. As always, you can donate to the Jeremiah Patterson Show, as this is independent journalism and we rely on your donations to continue this crucial, imperative work, especially investigative journalism documentaries like this. Also, you can check us out on Bluesky and Substack at tjpsnews. We're also on TikTok at the Jeremiah Patterson Show, so be sure to follow us there for more consistent reporting and news updates. Once again, reporting the news here without fear, favor, or corporate interference. All right, everyone, thank you so much. We have a full news weekend show ahead. There's a lot to get to, so be sure to subscribe to the Jeremiah Patterson Show so you don't miss anything.